5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Once again, Happy New Year. We're a few days into 2023, and for many of us, it's time to regain control of our appetites, to exert some self-discipline. Many of us make those New Year's resolutions to eat less, move more, all those sorts of things. But what about discipline of the mind? What about controlling our appetite to know? That's what the virtue of studiousness is all about, and that's what we're going to be talking about today on the show. Welcome to Ignition. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Bergwald, and we want to set your faith ablaze so that you might live the adventure that comes from a relationship with Jesus Christ. Before we get into the virtue of studiousness, we want you to know that we love listener feedback. So if you've got questions about today's episode, or if you have ideas for future episodes, please contact us. The easiest way to do so is by email, and the address is ignition@sfcatholic.org. And yes, this is one long run-on sentence. Again, ignition@sfcatholic.org. I just had to throw that in there because, Robyn, I just get going, and it's like, oh my gosh, this is just like, there are periods in this, but I just blow past the periods and make it one.
It all works out.
It all works out. So the voice, if you're on listening by radio or podcast, is Robyn Bruggeman. Hey, Robyn, Happy New Year.
Hello.
You know, you were here for a long time. Then Renee Kranz she's like, I need to be on the show again. So I let her come back for a couple weeks, but it's time to bring back the Bruggeman.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that's obvious. Yeah, she's not going to say anything mean. It's the new year. We're trying to turn new leaves over. And we're actually, in case people haven't heard you on the show before, maybe they missed a few episodes or just haven't heard you, would you mind briefly introducing yourself?
Sure. I am Robyn. I am a Catholic convert. I am really learning to live as a daughter of Christ. I am wife to Spike, mom to 7, mother-in-law to 2, grandma to 1, and another on the way. And yeah, I'm an adult convert to the faith, and I just love learning about it and living it out.
And how fitting that is that you love learning about our faith for an episode like today.
I said it on purpose.
Actually,
I don't think I did. I think if you go back to previous episodes, I probably say something like that. But it does fit with our topic for today.
So we are going to be talking about the virtue of studiousness. And before people don't change the channel.
Right.
We're not talking about like the classroom. It can apply for those who are in the classroom, but if you left the classroom far behind and have no desire to return, this is still a show that should have something. Hopefully we'll have something for you.
Yeah, it will.
So do you want to maybe explain like how this was a topic that you proposed that we talk about on this episode? And as I said in the tease, I do think it's an important topic for kind of New Year's resolution time. But maybe start by why you wanted us to talk about it, regardless of when people listen to this episode.
Well, ironically, I guess this came to me in a class when I'm being studious now. So I've been blessed to take part in something that our diocese offers, the School of Missionary Discipleship. And the first year is on prayer. It's been phenomenal. We're so blessed that we have great things like this in our diocese. And you have been filling in. You've filled in a few times as the teacher, and you talked on virtues. So a few weeks ago, we had you as our instructor. And you talked on virtues, and you mentioned a few that I had not heard as virtues, and one of them being studiousness. And I was just blown away by it. I don't know, because I didn't realize it was a virtue. And it just got me thinking about a lot of different things like knowledge and what we know and what we should maybe desire to know more of or less of. And anyway, so I would just love to learn more from you on the virtue of studiousness.
Great. So yeah, I'd be happy to oblige. Let's start though, maybe for the sake of listeners, because they haven't learned as you had as part of the School of Missionary Discipleship about virtues in general. Maybe just a brief foundation laying, stage setting. What virtues are. So virtues are not unique to Christianity. I think a lot of us probably associate it with religion, but actually people like the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle were talking about virtue centuries before Jesus and completely apart from Judaism. So the idea of virtue is needing to be a religious idea. It's just the idea of, one way to describe them as habits of excellence.
Yeah. that's a good way to think
really
of it.
training what it means to be human in such a way that we are pursuing excellence in governing our appetites, but also in being wise and discerning in terms of the best course of action, knowing what the right thing to do is in the moment, maybe growing in our ability to be courageous in the face of difficult challenges and so on. Sort of describing a couple of virtues right there, but those are some of what it means to be virtuous. And Aristotle and Scripture talk about things like the 4 cardinal moral virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Scripture, we read about the virtues of faith, hope, and love. Those 3 in particular are infused into our souls, given to us as gifts at baptism. But the moral virtues, anybody, regardless of their religious affiliation or lack thereof, can understand and certainly practice the virtues, just as Aristotle, who was quote-unquote pagan Greek, talked about them as well. So that's just a little bit. Any Robyn, from what you learned in school missionary discipleship, just in terms of virtue in general, anything else that I'm forgetting about or things you have questions about just in virtues in general?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay.
But I love that you point out that it isn't specific to Christianity.
Yeah.
Like, that's really
Yep.
wild.
And we're all called to grow in virtues.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to be virtuous? That's where some of the discussion, disagreement can come in. That's where, thankfully, we do have divine revelation, the teachings of God given to us through the church, to clarify what does it mean to be excellent as a human being.
Yeah.
Jesus sets the standard for us.
Yeah.
One reason that Jesus came, we're still in the Christmas season here. One reason Jesus came is to be a model of holiness, to show us what it means to be fully human, fully alive, to live life abundantly. That is, to be virtuous. Nobody's more virtuous than Jesus. But you don't need to be religious to understand and live the virtues.
Yeah. Which is almost like adds just, if you are Christian and you think of them in a Christian way, then you just add the holiness kind of into the virtues.
Absolutely.
And then that can change them even more.
Absolutely. Yep. So there's the theological virtues, faith, hope, and love, and the cardinal virtues, cardinal because they're the hinge virtues. Everything else sort of falls underneath them as their daughters. So again, cardinal virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And many of them have many different children or daughters. So I know one thing you were struck by. You didn't know there were. So different moral theologians and moral philosophers have articulated lists of dozens.
So is there
of
an
different
actual
virtues.
set list?
Not
Like you
officially.
probably couldn't find because people have added? Or, how does that work?
No, just people have different lists,
Okay.
basically. The list that you saw, I
Fascinating.
think, was derived from St. Thomas Aquinas.
Oh, yeah. I think you did say that. in class.
So there's not an official list. There are some quote unquote official virtues, like the theological and the 4 cardinal virtues, and then others as well. The church does do some teaching on, but there's not an official comprehensive list. There are a variety of comprehensive lists.
So what makes, like with, for example, the studiousness, what makes that then a virtue?
Yeah,
How does it get on a list?
Yeah. So, studiousness is a daughter of the virtue of temperance, and temperance is all about ordering our desires properly. So we all have a variety of desires. The most common desires are desires or appetites. So appetites in this sense is not just about what I eat.
Right.
Appetite is understood in a broader sense for my desire. So I'll say appetite or desire probably interchangeably in this context. So the most well-known appetites or desires in this sense are for food, for drink, alcoholic drink in particular, and for sexual pleasure. So those 3 are probably, for most of us, the strongest desires, strongest appetites understood most broadly. So there are virtues which are proper to each of those. For food, that is the virtue of temperance, or abstinence. For abstinence applies most fully actually to drink, and then chastity for sexual pleasure. So those are the three that refer to those three different appetites or desires that we have. Okay. But then we do have also a desire to know things. In the presentation that you saw, I mentioned how Aristotle again said that all human beings by nature, by simply being human, desire to know. We all want to know. We all want to know everything. So, if temperance is the virtue that's about controlling, directing, ordering our desires, our appetites, then that means that there must be a virtue which governs, controls our appetite to know. Just as there are virtues that control or that govern our appetite for food, sex, and drink. Similar, there's one for our desire to know things.
Right, which would make sense then.
Yep. So I'd say that's how studiousness got on the list to begin with.
Okay.
Questions, comments?
Not yet.
Okay. So, studiousness properly orders in at least a couple different ways that are worth talking about our desire to know things. On the one hand, and the way you look at this is oftentimes a virtue has opposing vices.
Right.
So there are vices that oppose the virtue in excess or
maybe not enough of and
minimizing.
Sort of
Yep. So and the virtue is about moderating the appetite. All right. So with regard to our desire, we might want to know too much. We might want to know too little. And studiousness is about knowing just right. Just the Goldilocks principle, right? So there is a vice called the vice of vain curiosity. Vain curiosity is a vice which afflicts some of us, maybe many of us. I'm raising my hand if you're listening to this by radio or podcast. So vain curiosity, when you suffer from the vice of vain curiosity, that means that I fail to govern my desire to know. And so I just want to know everything about everything all the time.
Okay.
So it's about trivial knowledge that's unimportant. So just as with food, so this is like the intellectual version of gluttony. So whereas if I'm failing to be temperate in food, in the sense of excess, I eat too much, too quickly, too often,
right?
Too much of the wrong kind of thing, and that results in gluttony. Which I have literally suffered from. So I'm still trying to get that appetite under control. But so when it comes to studious vain curiosity, when it comes to knowledge, I want to know the wrong kinds of things at the wrong times, too much, too fast. It's like the fast food version.
Right. And I feel like we live in a time where because of social media and technology and our phones being so accessible, we can binge or overindulge. Yes, so easily in the studiousness area, in knowledge. So in knowledge. So I think that's what I just feel like we can all benefit from learning how to be studious. And be a good steward of studiousness.
Be a good steward. Yes, well said. So what we're going to talk briefly about the opposing virtue or the opposing vice, rather. I don't remember what it's got a Latin title. I'll describe what it is. But then we're going to focus on how do we live this out more. So let's do that in just a second. But folks, if you're just tuning in, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Dr. Chris Bergwald, talking today with Robyn Bruggeman about the virtue of studiousness, which is not just for people in classrooms. It's about properly ordering, governing, directing our desire to know stuff. So again, there are two opposing vices: one of excess, which would be vain curiosity; one of minimizing. Again, there is a Latin title for it, and probably therefore an English translation. I don't remember it right now, but basically, we are called to know things, to grow in knowledge. But there are some people who are just not interested in growing. And I don't mean you have to, this doesn't mean you need to be book smart. It's not what we're talking about here. But we're called to grow in knowledge of God first and foremost, but of his creation as well. So if we don't do that, we're also failing to exercise the virtue of studiousness.
that just reminded me of something that you said in class. Like, am I studious to the people nearest and dearest to me and the things I need to be attentive to? And that's when you said that, just showed me that it does apply to everybody. Because when I hear studiousness, then I do think classroom, and I do think books, stacked up. I don't love to read unless it's something I'm really interested in.
Yep.
And generally that's something I can grow in my faith, or maybe it's parenting or whatever. But how there is a different feeling, at least for me, as opposed to like classroom learning or like being in school, or really expanding your knowledge on something that, and especially if it's something you're like, okay, the Lord is leading me to this, to learn about X, Y, Z. It's almost like it just feels different in the way you are taking it in and the way you're absorbing it, and just the way it makes you, I don't want to say, can I say the way it makes you feel?
Absolutely.
Just, more fulfilling even, I think.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's how what you're describing. When we're living virtuously, it does, like, there is it's deeper than a feeling, but
right. That's why I was like, I wasn't sure if I could say feeling.
That's closest that we like. It's like, when you just feel good when you're eating, like, let's see, physically. Yeah. When you get enough sleep and you're eating right and maybe doing some exercise, you quote unquote feel good. Right. There's not like literally usually an emotional, there's not emotion to it, but we don't know how else to describe it. Like, I'm just running well. Yeah. Not literally running, but I'm just being well.
I know what you're saying.
That's true with all the virtues. So when I am really exercising the virtue of studiousness, when I'm really bringing focus to my desire to know things, it's properly, this appetite to know things is properly focused and oriented and directed, then it's akin to feeling good when you're eating well, getting rest, and you're doing some exercise. Like there is something similar that happens within us, like quote unquote runner's high. There's the studiousness high or whatever with all the virtues, because we're like a car that's just running down the highway, and it's running well. Right. It quote unquote feels good, for lack of a better phrase. Okay, so with studiousness, then how do we grow in the virtue of studiousness? Again, it means to direct this appetite to know things, so it's properly ordered and it's aimed in the right direction. Well, what's the right direction? I think this is where, Lord, what do you want? How do I grow in the virtue of studiousness? Lord, what do you want me to focus on right now? So much of this, and this is why year one of school missionary discipleship is predominantly on relational prayer. Because if I'm going to properly aim my desire to know, I'm wondering, well, where do I aim it? Well, how about I ask my God and my Lord? So I really would, and this does obviously apply to maybe the listener who's not religious right now, but if you are, in prayer, ask, Lord, what do you want me? This is what I've started to do because, again, I struggle with vain curiosity. So I have all sorts of books at my office and at home, also the books that I haven't read yet that I'm interested in. Vain curiosity.
Yeah, me too.
But I haven't actually read them yet. Lord, where do you want me to focus this desire to know things? Because some of us can fall also into that sort of analysis paralysis. Oh my gosh, I don't even know where to start, so I don't go anywhere.
Or rabbit hole.
Exactly. Yes. So where do you want me to start? And then to focus my attention there. And the Lord might not want me to stay there for the whole time. This is kind of my, my quote unquote OCD. When I start a book, I really want to finish it. But that's not necessarily the case. Maybe the Lord just wants me to read part of a book.
That makes me feel so much better for all my unfinished books.
It's easier said than done, though, Robyn. I have such a compulsion to finish the book that it's really, but that might be like,
but maybe God is like, okay, I had you get out of that what I wanted you to get out of. Exactly. Now I'm on to the next thing I'm going to show you.
Yep. So be docile to his promptings, right? Yeah. But to be attentive to, obedient to his promptings, docile to his promptings, and focus my attention on what it is. And then this kind of connects to what you said before. Don't get distracted.
Yeah.
So this is where it's so easy with cell phones, with social media, with the internet at the ready, whether it's on our phone or on our computer, we can be distracted by the shiny object. Yeah. And if we know what the Lord wants us to focus our desire to know on, then stick to that. This doesn't mean, I'm not saying obviously like spend therefore 24/7 on that thing, but when you have that free time and you're pretty sure the Lord wants you to read, it might be a novel. Or the Lord wants you to get to know this person better. Again,
yeah.
it might not be, right? Studiousness can, whatever it might be. Maybe he wants you, maybe he wants you to delight in his creation by taking a bird watching.
Yeah.
It might be cultivating this habit of mind of just being attentive and focused on whatever it is.
And an awareness too of
Yep.
what God is putting in front of you.
What do you want me to focus on, Lord? And putting aside the distractions, because what's going to happen is we'll get into it, and whether it's reading the book or watching the bird or being with the person, and after a period of time, might be 5, 10 minutes, might be 10 minutes, and this is still me, Robyn. Last night this happened. While we're recording this happened last night. My wife Jermaine and I were in a conversation. And I picked up my phone, and she said, "Oh, are you looking up the thing we're talking?" No. Oh, so are you done with the conversation? No, I just by habit
picked it up,
and I don't know, checked texts or email or something. Don't do that.
Yeah. It's so hard, and we all do it, but we do need to have that discipline.
We do. And this is, I will recommend on this point. Secular book, secular author. He might be religious, but there's not religious content to it. Cal Newport has a book called Digital Minimalism, which is about being intentional about our use of digital media. And I think that's the key word, be intentional. If right now I'm supposed to be focused on this book or this bird or this person or whatever it is, maybe you're learning how to cook. Maybe you focus on the bread. Book, bird, person, bread, whatever it is. Stay focused on that and resist the urge that you've probably cultivated by habit, practice. A bad habit, that's a vice. A good habit is a virtue. So maybe by your vice, you've, like me, cultivated, check on your phone. Put the darn phone down and be focused on the thing or the person that you're supposed to be focused on.
Totally.
And this is where some people will even go to the point of like, you know what, I'm just going to not swear off social media, but I'm going to
maybe take a fast from it
or more.
Or forever.
Yeah. Maybe. But what some people will do is they'll do a fast from social media and they'll replace it with a more like an analog habit.
Oh.
Like bread making or bird watching.
Okay.
Or reading. Archbishop Charles Chaput, and along this point, Archbishop Charles Chaput, Dr. Ted Sheree talks about this in one of his books. Archbishop Chaput said, there's so many ways for us as Catholics to consume faithful media or to consume good Catholic content, podcasts, videos. And Archbishop Chaput said, these are all good things, but put them, quote unquote, down and pick up a book. So this does not apply to everybody because I know for some people, like things like dyslexia, like reading is actually literally there. But if it's not hard for you, if you don't have a learning disability, I'm working I love books, but I'm easily distracted. I'm still working really hard to take Archbishop Chaput's advice and to pick up the book instead of the podcast or the streaming video series. They're all good things. I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying we shouldn't do them. Subscribe to them, so on. But in moderation. And maybe pick up a book more often than you pick up the podcast.
Slow down. Take it. It's you're invited into. It invites you into a relationship with God in that way too, because you almost experience more quiet for sure. So I was on silent retreat a couple weeks ago where we didn't have our phones or our smartwatches. And it's so good. It's so good. You have so much freedom. There's so much freedom when you don't have your device fighting for your attention, Yep. And so I have not fully introduced as much as I was. And it's been so nice it really is freeing. And then you have the freedom to look at the books or to just sit and so you could learn from a person. You could learn. We're constantly taking in information for good or for bad, constantly. And so I think you just can choose more wisely when you aren't going from one thing to the next thing.
Exactly.
And the other thing that I thought of is, before we had our phones, which, you and I can remember what it's like to not have cell phones. Then if we wanted to know, we had to go to the library.
Yep.
Or, we didn't have Amazon and all these places where we could get a book in 2 days.
Yep.
Or get it digitally immediately.
Yep.
So I think then what your desire to know, you are able to think about it a little bit.
Be intentional.
Yes. Where now it's like, I think I want to know this. And so you quick pull it up and then you're in it. And you don't even have the time to. And I feel like we absorb differently too when we're not going the fast pace on our phones or on our tablets or computers, as opposed to when we're reading from a book or learning from a person.
So there are two key words here for me. So intentionality, be intentional about what you're learning about, whether again it's a book or a podcast or a person or bread,
or birds.
And be contemplative to the extent that you can. Yeah, that pace, savor what you're reading. And if what you're reading or watching or listening to, you can't really savor it, is it really worth reading or watching or listening to? You don't really savor French fries unless they're really, really good. You don't really savor fast food, right? You don't really savor junk food. Well, then maybe we shouldn't eat it.
Right.
I think there's
of it as a good meal.
There's a lot of junk knowledge.
There's a lot of junk knowledge
out there.
And
maybe we shouldn't eat it.
Yeah.
Maybe we shouldn't consume that.
Healthy.
Yeah.
Healthy food.
So being
healthy
intentional
knowledge.
And consuming it, if you will, contemplatively.
I like that.
Intentionality and contemplative consumption of content.
I love that.
I think would be a thing too. So we got about a minute left, Robyn. So I think, kind of the way I started the show, a lot of people are thinking about what they literally eat or how much they're exercising, but maybe to start to control that appetite of knowledge.
Yeah.
And maybe I don't need to be checking Facebook or Twitter or, God forbid, TikTok. Kids, Bergwald kids. Every minute. Let yourself be bored.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let yourself be bored. Don't always fill your mind with somebody else's content. When you're driving, turn the radio off. If you're at home, put it all aside. Books, podcasts, TV, internet, and just be. Maybe there's other people. Maybe it's just you. But just be. Just look outside. Look what's around us.
Yeah. Amen.
And pray to grow in the virtue of studiousness. Robyn, 10 seconds left. Any final thoughts from you?
I think just the verse, be renewed in the spirit of your mind.
St. Paul, Ephesians, be renewed in this. No, yeah.
Yeah.
Be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Thanks, Robyn.
Yeah. Thank you.
And folks, that will wrap up this episode of Ignition. Again, you can contact us, ignition@sfcatholic.org, with any questions about this one or ideas for future episodes. Until next time, may God bless you.